Well, good morning. I'm going to say a quick introduction to today, and thank you all for being here. My name is Eliza Canty-Jones, and I serve with the Oregon Historical Society as the editor of our journal, the Oregon Historical Quarterly, and as our public outreach manager. And it's really, this has been something that we've been planning for a few months, and it's wonderful to see you all here, to be able to hear this conversation, which we're also recording and will be archived in the Oregon Historical Society's research library, and so available to everyone. So for those of you who don't know, the Historical Society was founded in 1898. We have a museum in Portland. We have one of the most significant research collections on the West Coast. We publish a journal quarterly, and we do educational and outreach programs in Portland and around the state. We also have some fantastic online resources, so our website is ohs.org. We're supported by members, private foundations, and public funding through the state and through the Multnomah County levy that was passed a few years ago. So we're grateful for all of those many streams of funding. This program that we have today is part of a series we're doing this year called the Oregon Black History Series, and there's a little flyer and some information about OHS on the table at the side. We saw an opportunity in our exhibit schedule to focus a year of exhibits and programming on Black history in Oregon, and of course that is simply Oregon history. But we know there are areas that need a little bit more attention to help bring them into the fold and change our dominant narrative about Oregon history. So this year is an opportunity to do that, and that's one of the reasons that we have this panel today. So we're grateful again to a wide range of supporters for this work. But in particular, this program is also supported by Oregon Humanities, which is a statewide nonprofit organization and an independent affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And that is what funds Oregon Humanities Grant Program. So I'm going to introduce our moderator today, and then she's going to introduce the panelists. Kim Williams, Dr. Kim Williams, is Associate Professor of Political Science and Academic Director of the Center for Women, Politics, and Policy at the Hatfield School of Government at Portland State University. Before joining the faculty at PSU in 2011, she taught at the Harvard Kennedy School from 2000 to 2010. Her research and teaching interests converge around issues of race and immigration in American politics. She is the author of Mark One or More, Civil Rights in Multiracial America. It was published in 2006, and numerous articles and book chapters. Cambridge University Press will publish her second book, Immigration Devolved. She was appointed to the U.S. Census Advisory Committee for the African American population in 2007, and she holds a BA from the University of California, Berkeley, and a PhD in government from Cornell University. So please welcome our panel.
Thank you, everyone. It is just a privilege and an honor to sit here. I hope someone just takes a picture of of all of us. And so I'm just so pleased to be here, and I just want to thank all of you for being here, and especially to our panelists. It means a lot to all of us to have you here. I could spend the entire hour that we have doing introductions of these amazing women, but I'm going to avoid doing that in the interest of getting to some of the questions. So I'm just going to quickly introduce Senator Jackie Winters here to my left. She was elected in 1998 as District 31 State Representative, the first African American Republican to achieve this honor. Next to her, we've got Senator Margaret Carter, elected to the Oregon House of Representatives in 1985, and eventually won a seat in the Oregon Senate. To her left, we've got Senator Avel Gordly, the first African American woman to be elected to the Oregon State Senate, and represented Oregon State Senate District 23 from 1997 to 2009. She's been an activist and just an inspiration, all of these women an inspiration to me and to all of us in this room. So thank you again. So I've got a few questions for you. The first question that I wanted to ask you is about one of the reasons why we organized this panel in the first place has to do with the significance of African American women serving in our state Senate, given the long history of racist public policy in the state of Oregon. Can you talk about how that history affected your decision to serve in office and your priorities as public servants?
You want anyone to start? or you
Anyone
wanna give a name?
chime in?
Well, we kind of, because the three of us are like three sisters. And because we are like three sisters, and you can visualize what you see here today is what you saw when all three of us were here in this building, particularly since all three of us really served on Ways and Means. Which for those who are out there in visual land, that's where the money is. And so, so when you come in to present your proposals or to testify, you will see these three, and it's pretty much how we sat, because they're on the occasion, generally during that period of time. Here, either I was chairing, or Senator Carter was chairing, or you had our good friend Senator Gordly. So the three of us are really like sisters. So last night when we talked, we thought Senator Gordly could start off and talking about the constitutional reasons, and then we will chime in. We've learned in our process, and I need to set how we have worked, because we learned that we, irrespective of Republican and Democrat, for us it was about getting things done that we knew that needed to occur. And so we also learned something else, that we knew that we had to have a voice in all of the caucuses, because part of the work in this building talks about changing attitudes, changing where people are. So the three of us have kind of kept that through our career. So with that, my good Senator Gordly.
Well, it's important to say and to add to the history that Kim has laid out, that Margaret Louise Carter, was the first African-American woman elected to the Oregon Legislature. The first. And we're all standing on the shoulders of, and this is reflecting on Oregon's history and the place of other African-American women in that history. If you go back before 1912 and the suffragist movement, you had Hattie Redmond. Actually, her name was Harriet Hattie Redmond, who was active with Oregon Colored Women's Clubs, and again worked to acquire the vote for women leading up to 1912. And then you had Beatrice Morrow Kennedy, who was active with the NAACP, and who, starting with that organization around 1918, started the work toward achieving a public accommodations law, a civil rights law in Oregon. Now, Beatrice Morrow Kennedy was a journalist. She was the first African-American woman lawyer in the state. She was the first African-American woman to run for a legislative seat,
Right.
and from Southwest Portland. She also ran for a seat on the school board during her time, and this is in the 30s. And her platform, interestingly, was achieving a quality, non-racist education for all children. That says something about our progress.
No, Kathleen, voice.
And the other thing about Beatrice Morrow Kennedy, again, she was a journalist, and she used the newspaper, her newspaper that she and her husband published and edited, to organize the community around the call for the public accommodations law. And what's so important about our gathering here today is that it marks the 60th anniversary of the passage of Oregon's civil rights law, that public accommodations law. And I hope that while you're in the building today, that you will go outside of the House chamber and look at the picture. It's a picture that is in the Oregon Historical Society collection, nicely framed, mounted there on the wall. The picture captures the moments after the law, the bill was passed out of the House chamber. And in that picture, you see a young Mark Hatfield when he was a state representative. You know, he went on, those of you who know Oregon history know that he went on to be a great statesperson, a great United States senator. You see in that same picture Otto and Verdell Rutherford. They were activists with the NAACP. They were friends of Hatfield. And you see the other members of the NAACP, again, all in this picture, which was taken moments after passage of the bill in April of 1953. And it took 18 legislative sessions, 18 legislative sessions, 36 years, to accomplish passage of that bill. And I just want to say to you, as a way of honoring the legacy of all of the people in the picture, they're all gone now. With when we lost Mark Hatfield, we lost the last living person who was a party to that history. Before you leave the building today, go look at the faces in that picture and know what it represents. Now, there's a backstory to how that picture happens to hang outside of the House chamber. And I want to tell that story, and then I'll stop talking, and I know my beloved sisters have lots more to add to our what we want to share with you today. In 1999, we held a day of acknowledgement. The Oregon Legislative Assembly held a day of acknowledgement, and it was a time when Oregon political leaders, including our governor, our Senate president, our Speaker of the House, other statewide electeds, all came together, Supreme Court Justice, our Chief Justice at the time, all came together in the House chamber to renounce Oregon's racist history, racist past, and to pledge through resolutions, which were all read that day, to pledge that we would all work toward an Oregon that respects and honors the dignity and worth of all people. And the pledge was also about all of us working toward the equality of all people. Again, that was 1999, Day of Acknowledgement. People from every walk of life, every corner of the state packed the House chamber, and it was truly a remarkable moment in the life of Oregon's story. How many of you were present for that day? Okay, wonderful. And so why am I going back to 99? Because it was on that day that several people said, as they looked around the Capitol and the walls of the Capitol, people asked the question, where are the pictures, where's the marker, where's something that tells the story of our presence, the presence of African Americans in Oregon? And there was a reference to the mural that is on the, help me with the word.
The wall?
On the main floor.
In the gallery.
Thank you. The mural that features Lewis and Clark and York, the slave who helped them make the trip, and Sacagawea, who also helped them make the trip. That mural is there, but I digress. Remember the year that the legislative administration put out the booklet, it's the booklet that describes the legislative process, and all the members' pictures are in there, and how the three branches of government works and
Right.
all that. And on the cover was the picture of Lewis and Clark, minus Sacagawea and minus York. The
York,
picture
yeah.
had been cropped. Well, because we are the correcting word, are the correcting influence in the body, we had to say something about that. But it's a perfect example of how our stories, our history gets lost, not included, we're omitted. Let me back up, tell you the story of how the picture came to hang outside of the House chamber. There's a committee, a capital committee, that decides on what gets installed and where, and went to that committee with the big picture from the Oregon Historical Society, and asked that consideration be given to having it hung in a prominent place in the Capitol. And in our minds, I mean, those of us who were working on this project, that prominent place was outside the House chamber. But the committee suggested that perhaps it should hang in the basement.
That was in 2003.
Room 50, hearing room 50 was suggested. But again, if you really understand the history and what that picture represents, you wouldn't go to the basement. But that's what the committee, in their wisdom at the time, thought would be appropriate. The compromise was that the picture was installed on the main floor, but it wound up being behind a coat rack. A coat rack was shifted, and so often you couldn't really see and fully appreciate the picture for what it was. And one day, my staff, Denise Peterson, my legislative staff, and I still don't know how she accomplished this, but she had the picture moved to a place above the water fountain, which is on the same wall with the
In the
coat
corner
rack,
in the
with
dark.
with the coat rack. And her thought was, if the picture's above the water fountain, then maybe there'll be some subtle.
Yeah.
Okay, you're going with me here. And then one day, I had the thought of going to see Speaker Menace, Karen Menace, and talking to her about that photo and its importance. And because, again, we were coming upon the time when we were celebrating the 50th commemoration.
2003.
2003, exactly. So I went in to see Speaker Menace. I said, would you please come for a walk with me? And she did. She walked down to where the picture was hanging above the water fountain. I told her the story, which she did not know. She did not know the story of the passage of the Public Accommodations Law. And she was really moved by what she was hearing. And next thing I know, she's pulling the picture. She's looking behind it and saying, looks like we could just take this off and move it. And so we did. We took it off the wall, walked down the hallway to her office, and had a little conversation there about the significance of the photo, and she agreed that that photo would be installed outside of the House chamber. One of her staff came in and said, but isn't there a committee that makes decisions about where, and she said, yes, there is, but I'm the speaker. And it's gonna go
Hail to the power of women!
and it's going to go outside the House chamber. Well, so anyway, just
That's a wonderful story, and it's just so symbolic. It really tells us a lot. And I just am wondering, just to stick on this topic of the Public Accommodations Act, I wanted to just ask any of you, where do you see its significance today? How should we think about this momentous anniversary?
Kim, if you don't mind, that I think that we have not formally introduced our opportunity today. So I'd like to take a couple of minutes to do that and give thanks to the Oregon Historical Society for its forward thinking and the opportunity for a public dialogue. It has not happened before. But with the likes of Carrie Temchuk and Eliza, who understands the importance of the totality of Oregon history being told and being displayed, is very, very important. And for its time in the history of our society, we have a new curator, Brian Carter, who's sitting in the audience. Brian, let them see your brown face, honey.
Stand up, stand up.
Stand up. He comes to us from the state of Washington. So, Kim, I don't mean to just be disrespectful, but I just think it's important, since this is going out into radio land, that people understand some of the progress that is being made. And I want to really give kudos and thanks to my sisters in the struggle, because people see us and you think that modern day history is at work, so therefore there's high regard for all the contributions that all of us make. But you don't realize that there are still struggles in this great state of Oregon, in this wonderful building by which we sit today. It has not been that easy, Kim, even though we do have, thanks to Senator Hatfield, the former governor of this state, and members of this body in one of these houses, that we see a difference. But if I could take just a couple of seconds to say that we take a few minutes to give kudos to somebody who has passed on from us, and that's Lynn Lundquist, who was the Speaker of the House, and who was very strong around education and issues that we cared about that even came to the district. So just 1 second of silence for Lynn Lundquist. I'd appreciate that. Lynn was a great man of conviction and one who loved this great state. My complete gratitude goes to the life and legacy of our beloved Senator Marco Hatfield, a man of great stature and commitment to making a difference in the lives of oppressed people. It was okay for Marian Anderson to come here and sing for us. She sung all over the world. But when she got ready to go to bed that night, they had to take her back to Portland because she couldn't sleep in a Salem hotel. Ladies and gentlemen, that is still history. But also, when I first came here in 1985, there were places that I couldn't go. Right across the street was what we called the Third House restaurant. And when I walked in, I should say to you, Lori, that the lobbyists of OEA immediately start singing the song Old Black Joe when I walked in. And so it goes that our lives have been representative of great policy and good relationships, because there's no way you can leave out of this building without having that. But had it not been for public accommodations, I don't know where we would be today. I don't know whether we can go to the places that we go to. I went to Fred Meyer buying some steak for Senator Winters and I to eat, and they called the police because I had too much meat. I must have stolen it. And I want you to know this was 2007 in Salem, Oregon, all in the newspaper. So I want you to know that, yes, there is progress, and yes, strides have been made, but yes, the acts of racism, institutionalized racism, is still alive and well. So our struggle, the struggle continues. And I can just imagine what happens to Senator Winters when she gets ready to do legislation here in this building. I had a piece of legislation that talks about forgiveness. A young man sent us a letter and said, you know, I used to couch surf, and I was a male prostitute. He now has a PhD from Princeton University and went to teach school, and I could not get this legislative assembly in 3 straight sessions to give an opportunity for this young man to be forgiven and to be able to teach school in this state. But thanks to the Lories of the world who helped us to go and try to get some legislation that say, okay, we'll take it case by case, one at a time, and create opportunity for people like this young man to be forgiven and to teach in our school system. I did not get it passed, but my sister picked it up, and last year they passed the legislation.
asked a very a question. I'm from the chronological advantage side. I say that she's a little bit older than I am, but
And I take pride in that.
But you know, my life in Oregon is back to the Vanport flood and all those years of history and the evolution of things that happened leading up to 1953. And, you know, in 1999, I introduced the bill that required the Department of Ed to actually, when they redo the curriculum, that curriculum includes all the ethnic minority history that has contributed to the state of Oregon. And 14 years later, I've introduced another piece of legislation that because the Department of Ed has decided in there, for whatever reason, that they did not want to do this legislation that the three of us passed in 1999. So this time, even though my sisters have left me, and they knew I was going to say this because I miss them, but I introduced legislation, and it's interesting enough that not only does it talk about all the ethnic groups, but it also includes all the commissions, the advocacy commissions, as well as the Historical Society, and every member of the Senate has signed on to that bill.
You know,
So
can I
it's-
add one thing to what you're saying? Because there's a companion piece of legislation that supports Senator Winter's work, and it was legislation that was passed in '97. And it was a bill that requires every school district in the state to have a multicultural curriculum and policy to back up the curriculum. And do you think that's been implemented anywhere in the state of Oregon since 1997? You see?
Portland has a policy.
But-
That's it.
I'm hopeful, though. I'm
policy, an
hopeful
equity
because
policy.
with the testimony on the bill this time, we had Dr. Crew. I've been assured by Ron Saxton that, and it doesn't hurt to sit on Ways and Means,
Not at all.
that they too supported the initiative and the bill, and that, you know, hopefully we will see finally after 14 years the actual development of curriculum. It's not that we don't know that history, that we were a part of history. It's getting it compiled to teach kids, whether they're living in Coos Bay, whether they're in Portland, or whether they're in Pendleton, or whether they're wherever they are in this great state of ours. We think that children and their families need to know all the contribution that has been made to make the state what it is today. And so, you know, I'm very hopeful that will occur. There's been a lot of changes since, you know, I came back from New York and went on my first real job search and was denied the ability to continue business ed, a business degree in 1959. And I went up to, someone told me they were hiring at the University of Oregon Medical School, so I went up and talked to the supervisor, made an application, was advised that if I passed a test, that I could come back and be considered. And I did. I went down on 6th Street. Then we had, you know, the Civil Service Commission and all that in those days. And so I thought, you know, I'm smart enough to go down and pass this test and go back up and ask for the job. And so I went down, took my test, got my little card in the mail that said I'd passed, and I went back up to the med school. And fortunately, Laura P. Martin, whom I will never forget, hired me. And Laura P. Martin did a lot of OJT with me and investing a lot in me. And I look back on it and say, you know, today when we talk about shoulders that we stand on of individuals, because we do stand on the shoulders of a lot of individuals in our lifetime. And as we were talking about the Marie Smiths and the Rutherfords and others in our life, I thought about Hazel Hayes, because that was the year that we had Model Cities. which was a different year for us when we talked about the years of developing and all the work that NAACP and Urban League. And I thought of Shelley Hill this morning when I was thinking of people in the past, and thought of Hazel. And Hazel was one of those warriors that did not take no for anybody's answer.
Kim, in relationship to some of the questions that you've asked us, and we went on our own, I think that if I were to say anything about being a member of this body and what are the implications for other African Americans who aspire to a greater level of leadership in the political arena, I think one of the greatest things for me, had I not had mentors like a Dave Barrows or Roger Martin or a Nan Heim, who was with us, went to put money in my car, but those people helped to convince other people in the political process to help me raise money. And see, if white women have a hard time raising money for the political process, you can imagine what it is for us of color, because the precedence has not been set in a way that people will think that access becomes an automatic for them. But for me, as an African-American woman who first came here, I had to let people know there are some things I can support that you do, but there are some things that I can't, because it negatively affects the African-American community and poor people. So therefore, I can't support that, even though I have your money. And you have helped me to get elected to be here. I mean, it's a sense, it violates not only the intelligence and the integrity of the individual like me, but I had to be upfront and say, give you for instance, when they first started the payday loans, do you know they were disproportionately in poor communities? And they also, there is a word that I'm looking for. Somebody in the banking community can help me. But when you borrow money, it doubles in terms of the interest.
Predatory lending.
Thank you. It was alive and well. And by the way, I could not get a predatory lending bill passed through this body. And it was both Democrats. And we would have been on the real front end of that had we passed that measure. But you can compounded interest. That's what I was thinking about. So when you loan a person who doesn't have money in the first place, $10, and the day that you go and say, I don't have the money, so can I pay you at oh, sure, that's great. What they don't know is that interest is compounding on a daily rate, and that $10 is now $50. And so people never get out of that. It reminds you of sharecropping? Yeah. What used to happen in that time. But so that's the kind of thing for me that was a struggle in 1984 when I first ran. But had it not been, and I suggest to everybody, when you talk about the struggle, there are going to be always people of goodwill that are involved across the racial divide. There are going to always be white people of interest and concern and compassion who want to be there to help. So I don't want to imply that it was only black people that helped get me elected, because there are not enough black people in any one district in this state to get elected. So you commit suicide when you first start off unless you understand that you need people of goodwill, whether they black, white, blue, yellow, or indifferent, to get votes from, to get money from, and to become engaged. But even that is the beginning of the struggle, because once you get here and you have legislation, my first piece of legislation that Avel and those guys made me have on my first agenda, and I'm so silly thinking that I can accomplish it, was South African divestiture and things like a Martin Luther King holiday. Oh my God. It was like having to sell my soul to get the legislation on the committee agenda, let alone getting it written. So those complications are before you get started and when you get started. So the challenge is at both ends.
Well, I think it's important, though, because all three of us represent different districts in different parts of the state. The part that I represent, I don't have a 0.05% of African Americans. So, and the expectation of my policy and what have you may be different from what Senator Carter, Senator, I still call them Senator, even I don't use former, because to me, they're still my senators and my sisters. But so you have to, as going into this, recognize who you're representing. And where, maybe there was difficulty in raising funds by my sister, I did not have. But remember that I grew up in this system. I was the assistant to Governor Atiyeh. As the state ombudsman, I was on McCall's staff back in '69. So, I grew up in this process and very fortunate to have some mentors along the way who helped me to get where I am today. So and mine was the journey that took place in the political arena.
Well, I'd really like to ask all of you, especially Senator Carter, as you mentioned predatory lending, the State of Black Oregon report, the Urban League report that you wrote a foreword for, is a very sobering report. I mean, it's talking about just the ways in which the recession has wrought havoc on everyone in the state, but certainly disproportionately on African Americans. Unemployment, predatory lending, foreclosures, low wages if you have a job in the first place.
That's right.
And I just wanted to know where your thoughts are about what can elected officials do to address some of those issues. I mean, you just spoke about you couldn't get the predatory lending bill out of committee. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that any state body is as challenged as we see our national body. Too many times we worry about the next election. Am I going to be around if I were to take this kind of a stand? And I have to give credit to Senator Gordly in the sense that she would say to people, I have to vote in my conscience. And everybody can't say that now, because I'm a member of the leadership team, so I can't vote my individual conscience. I have to vote for what the caucus interest is. But Senator Gordly was able to maintain kind of a maverick relationship in this process, because all of us have to do what we have to do in order to be here. And I maintain that sometimes just sitting in the room makes a difference in terms of what people say and how bills go forward. Now, say what you want to say about people. They might not be black enough. They might not be blue enough. They may not be female enough. You can give whatever label. But when you're on the inside of this body, you don't have an individualistic kind of agenda that is respected, because it's like the people who are lobbyists and of special interest also have special interest in many of our districts. Say what you want to say, the education team that is here, they have to protect the interest of that. But if it doesn't come down into our community enough where we can feel the impact of it, thank God for the Kathleen Sadats, thank God for the Avel Gordlys and for others who've been able to say, we're going to march against this, because you might can do all these overall themes that you have, but unless you tell all of Oregon's history, then it is a distorted body of information. And that's what has happened to us too often, and predatory lending was one of those. Even though Democrats had both houses and a governor, we still could not get predatory lending out of the House. Could not. Because too many people that year were running for other offices, quite frankly. And it's not that they didn't have the passion and the desire to do the right thing, but it has to do with my next steps in my career that too many times guide the consciousness of people, of those of us who are in this process. So it's very important to understand that even in my district, Kim, I had to try to do legislation against banks redlining. In Northeast Portland, if you can recall, you could not live east of Williams Avenue. When I tried to buy a house on Northeast 16th in Portland, the year that Jimmy Carter came to our great state, so you know how many years ago that was, I couldn't buy a house because the realtor passed by, and in one of my little closets in the house where the children's bedroom was, the curtain was mishanging on one side. Can you believe that? The curtain was missing on one side. And they refused to sell me the house over on Northeast 16th, and I live on Northeast 10th. So then, the way the realtor does it is to put my application on the bottom and talk with the bankers and say, I don't think this would be a good loan for you. And then all of a sudden, the banks just redline and say, we're not able to make that loan to you for new housing. And so how many people, if you come from a working class community like I did, how many people at that particular time, the house was $160,000. Now, how am I going to go to a bank that doesn't have $6,000 in it, let alone $160,000 to be able to purchase a home? So those are the kind of challenges that we're still having today along those lines.
I want to also make sure that we all leave here appreciating, again, this is about Oregon's history, that 3 black women, all elected in majority white districts. When we would go to meetings of the National Black Caucus of state legislators, they would want to know, how did you all do that?
Right.
And that is a part of the story that needs to be told. It belongs in a book. It needs to be taught. We're just giving you snatches of history and information today, but appreciate that Margaret Carter served 25 years? 25 years.
2 months short of 26.
17 years here, and Jackie, you are in your...
I'll complete 16 years
16.
actually as a policymaker, but actually started my career in if I take the med school,
but years
it was
in the legislature.
In the legislature, it'd be 16 years public service and go back to 1959.
Right. And again, it's part of that continuum. If we want to go back to 1918, if we want to start there, with the march toward the public accommodations law, and then we should talk about 2000 as well. 2000 is when we succeeded in putting the measure on the ballot, and again through the legislative process, to remove the remaining racist language from the Constitution. 2000. Now, well over 300,000 people said leave the language in there, which is telling, again, about our progress and the work, the more work that there is yet to do. But I think it's interesting that whenever we talk about Oregon's great accomplishments, and you hear the model bill, you hear the beach bill, you never hear the public accommodations bill. And Senator Hatfield said to us that of all of his accomplishments, and there were many great ones, what he was most proud of was the work he did together with the members of the NAACP Portland branch to accomplish the public accommodations law.
He did.
That says volumes to me. It says a great deal about who he was as a human being. And again, I think a part of why I wanted to participate on this day was just, again, to raise up that history, to honor that legacy of which we are all a part, because it's an Oregon story. It's not just black folks' story. It's an Oregon story. It's part of American history, all of our
But
history
it's
that we
also
get to
part of
share
the
and
albino
celebrate.
story.
Yeah.
I mean, for those of us who were around and understand the work that was done during that period of time, and to have that significant piece happen, it talked about the work of like I said, the Rutherfords, the Plumbers, the Ulysses Plumbers, and Marie Smith, and others who faithfully and diligently were down here, to get that passed. It talks about the hope that it gave to young people that says, we didn't have to worry. In fact, when I opened Jackie's Ribs in Portland back in 1980 something, and I was standing under the marquee, and my son couldn't figure out why I was getting emotional. Because I had already had a Jackie's here in Salem. I had one, I had about 3 or 4 by this time. And I said, you don't understand. You don't understand that when I grew up, there were places on Broadway that I couldn't eat. And to come back home and to open up a Jackie's Ribs right across from the Hilton Hotel was it was a real milestone, I got to tell you, and it was very significant. So that piece of history, it was for individuals in the albino in the community was very significant.
Senators, we only have a few minutes left, and I just want to make sure that I get in this last question. Maybe we'll have time for another, but I want to make sure I get this one in. And along the lines, Senator Gordly, Senator Winters, that you've been just speaking about, I'd like to know, what are the accomplishments that make you most proud?
I've had so many that, you know, the history bill, of course, was one, you know, and I happened to be in this building in the McCall years when we broke the ground, and we'll be honoring Harold Williams later this month, when we actually, by executive order, did the affirmative action bill when I was on ATIA's staff, and we did the racial hatred piece. So, and, you know, I started Oregon Food Chair, the largest food collection in the state of Oregon. Back when I was on TIA, I did the first $1 million for United Way. But I think in Northwest Black Pioneer, that one here in Salem, and to be able to honor my teacher, who I grew up with Portland, Mr. Ford, still makes me emotionally. So I think, you know, when you're in leadership positions, it gives you an opportunity to do some good work for others. And, you know, so I kind of think in terms of not only the people that shoulders that I stood on, and I need to share, because I talked about the 3 of us, and when they left me, I was very upset, and they know that. I appeared on the Tavis Smiley show, and one of the questions in preparing for that show, it was going to be about partisan or bipartisan politics. And so I called Senator Gordly, and I'll never forget it, because I called her and said, I'm going off to Houston, Texas to be on this show. Don't know what to expect. You know, it's going to be televised nationally. So what should I share with them? And she said, just let the Holy Spirit guide you. And when I made that comment on stage, and to my immediate right was Farrakhan. And so his voice is still on that tape, Holy Spirit. But my message was that the 3 of us are in one spirit and one unison when it comes talking about trying to get what we thought needed to be done and working together in a bipartisan way. We did not talk about that Avel, when she became an independent, and Margaret as the Democrat, or me as the Republican. You know, we knew we had a job to do, and so we also knew that where one could get something accomplished in their caucus, maybe they couldn't, or the other could in their caucus. And I leave you with that, because I think it's important that we all talk about this in a very collaborative way if you're going to get things accomplished. So I'm going to, because I got to leave, but you have one question that I need to talk about, because it's what's important in the next step. And what is important, and you touched on it when you talked about the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate in the state of Oregon is unacceptable as it relates to African Americans, and we have to do something about jobs. The other thing that is unacceptable, and I've talked a little to Urban League and others about, the disparity that exists in foster care and exists in OYA and DOC is unacceptable. Totally unacceptable, and it's one that I think together that we need to work to begin to address. And I need to go, because I'm going to head out to Ben, and I'm sorry to leave you, because my 2 sisters can wrap up. But it's something that I think as a state that when we talk about how much progress have we made, those that I mentioned has not been enough progress for us to be proud about.
Thank you, Senator.
you say?
Accomplishments? Well, I talked with my sister last night, and she said, be sure to say that you were ahead of everyone on the cell phone issue. So I'm just going to put that out there. People look at me like I come from another planet when I started talking about the cell phone issue. But I had a constituent, the late Ben Priestley, who called me and said that, he'd almost been hit by somebody who was talking on a cell phone, and he had the expectation that I was going to introduce cell phone legislation. So I did that early on. Okay. But aside from that, I'm proud of the work that we did that came from the community that established the Office of Multicultural Health. We have institutionalized our work around eliminating health disparities through the Office of Multicultural Health. It has a new name now, it's, diversity something, but the community did that. The community also brought forward the issue of environmental justice, and we were able to establish, with support from Governor Kitzhaber, and this is working through 3 different governors to actually get to legislation. It took 10 years to achieve, and the governor's environmental justice task force. So that's in place. I'm proud of the work that we did together with Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice Wallace Carson, that was focused on identifying racial and ethnic bias in the judicial system. Senator Carter had a great role in that work as well. Our work around parental abductions. And there's some others. I've mentioned the ballot measure that removed the remaining racist language. I was also proud to serve as chief petitioner on the ballot measure that established and raised Oregon's minimum wage in the mid-'90s. At the time, it made Oregon the state with the highest minimum wage. We did that in Oregon. I, like Senator Winters, I'm very concerned about where we are with employment, lack of jobs, the need to do much more there. Child poverty is shameful. The child poverty rates in this state are absolutely shameful, and when you look at the child poverty rates for African American children, shameful. We have a crisis when it comes to, we're never going to achieve greatness in any arena, including getting to a world-class educational system, pre-K through higher ed, until we address our revenue gathering system, which we all know it's broken. Our system of revenue gathering was developed in the 20th century to meet 20th century needs. And legislature after legislature after legislature, because everybody's thinking about the next election, has failed to live up to what's in the Constitution. In the Constitution, in the chapter on finance, Chapter 9, Sections 2 and 6, it says, in essence, when there's insufficient revenue to operate government services, the legislature shall levy a tax. So where is the sales tax? We haven't seen the push. What we hear instead was, well, we've tried it 9 times and it hasn't. We need a different kind of, a sense of urgency about taking care of not just what we can see right in front of us, but planning for the future of of those children that I'm concerned about who are languishing in poverty. We're not going to be able to achieve any of that until we deal with the revenue gathering system.
Senator Carter?
I think probably one of my greatest achievement would be leadership. And the reason I say that, because in Northeast Portland, a woman had never successfully run and won in that district. And to my niece, who's sitting in the very back, has a law degree and very well educated. I cried in the midnight. I cried at 3 o'clock in the morning against some of the opposition, the death threats that I received, my car being broken into, and nothing was stolen. It was just, you get out of the race. There was even a drunk man on the street who said to me, you need to get out of this race. This is a white man's race. And I would charge ahead. One of the great moments that would contrast that was when I went to vote and down on Mississippi before there was gentrification. People were in a nightclub, and one man just picked me up and put me on the pool table and said, "Here is Shirley Chisholm. Everybody stop and listen." And I didn't care. I'd be anybody that night. I was trying to get votes, you know. And we had our voter registration cards there with us to sign people up and to take them in. It was one of the greatest moments in Northeast Portland that we had in terms of my running and the kind of support that I got. And so I said to myself in running that no other woman, be she black, white, blue, yellow, or indifferent, would have to cry and share the shame that I was sharing as a 20th century American woman running for public office from Northeast Portland. So that would be what I consider my greatest accomplishment. Now, it's true that I passed first-time legislation like the Martin Luther King holiday, and this building was just packed with people because they called him a communist. One of my colleagues stood up and said to me, "How dare you seek to put this legislation on a President's Day? He was nothing but a communist." And she voted no, and one of my other colleagues just kind of came and stood by me because there were people in the audience that was not for having a Martin Luther King holiday. I think the second piece, Senator, is the work that was done before I even ran around you raising the voice with the Black United Front around South African divestiture. And at that time, we couldn't get it in 1985 when I wanted it, and because you have to learn that you have to build, have building blocks on legislation sometimes if you wanted it. And so Governor Atiyah said to me, "Margaret, I can give you one of these bills, I can't give you both of them." And so which one did you want? And the banking community wanted Martin Luther King as their own holiday opportunity. And so then I was stalled in the Senate from that, and finally went over with my big crocodile tears and talked to Governor Kitzhaber, who was the president of the Senate at the time, and said, "I have worked hard on this legislation, and I want this legislation." And so that was signed into law in 1985, and then South African divestiture, and I needed 1/31st vote on that, and I had to go and plead my case to the one member of the Democratic Party, and that was Jeff, what's Jeff, I can't think of Jeff's last name, from out here in Salem. Jeff, what is it? Yes, thank you. Jeff said, "Margaret, you're going to kill me in my district on this bill." And that's the only reason. But for you, I would love to do this bill. So Vera Katz said, "Go back to him again and tell him this is your take-home bill." That's when I found out the language of what is take-home and what can make you come back because you were so worthy of that, and people want you to stay around. So I went back and said, "Jeff, you're my 31st vote, and I need to take this bill home." And we got that bill through the House at the midnight hour. State police had to protect us. There were so many anti-people against it. And at that time, Nike had $800 million invested into South Africa. So we had to give them a chance to withdraw some of their, give them protection against their monies that was invested in South Africa at the same time as well. But it was not an easy thing. Now, I could have said, I don't care what you have in South Africa, we want this bill. But the governor wouldn't have signed that bill. So what do? You retreat and you come back for the next time rather than to just piss everybody off. And then you don't get it the next time around. And so you have to learn that politics is about compromise. And so I compromised that year. We came back in 1987, and that's when we got South African divestiture. Was it as strong as we wanted it? No, it was not. But I learned in politics that sometimes that the first building block is more important sometimes than the third or the fifth, because at least you have a point by which you begin. And that was the thing that was important. So my life has been, in terms of these kind of issues, very, very much dotted with scare tactics and that kind of stuff. And by the way, Senator Gordly in the cell phone bill, I was not for that bill. Now, this is so we've been talking all the good stuff, but to tell you sometime when we divide it, I was not for the cell phone bill at that particular time. How am I going to get my business straight? I can only do it when I'm traveling. And they put so much heat on me. I was the 16th vote in the Senate on the cell phone bill because I wanted Senator Gordly to have success and other people who were bugging the daylights out of me for that bill. And that's how I was to vote on that. Concern, Senator Kim, just one thing.
Sure.
Jobs, jobs, jobs. And do not forget, in Northeast Portland, we have as many as 3 generations that have been without jobs. So when the state has been 8.5%, Northeast Portland has been as much as 21%. So we cannot, and I want you guys to adopt the language of education and training, not just education and training, because that's where we're going to get a lot of those kids who are involved in gang activity and a lot of the parents that we call irresponsible. They can't find jobs. Anybody's irresponsible if you can't find a job. You can't put food on the table. So it's not irresponsibility, it's access to opportunity, and that's what we've missed in this state and in Northeast Portland. Thank you for your work today.
That's an excellent way to end it. One last comment,
One
Senator.
last thing. I just want to honor the memories of Gladys McCoy and Judge Mercedes Diaz.
Right.
They paved the way.
That's
They
right.
poured so much into us.
That's right.
And
We
you
honor
two
them.
are paving the way for all of us coming up. And I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for being here. Thank you to Eliza. Thank you to the Oregon Historical Society. And thank you as well, Senators Gordly, Carter, and Winters.
Are you all members of the Oregon Historical Society? Anyone need to sign up today?
I'm a member of the chair of the board. Please sign up. I need help.
I want to say I was here on the day that the divestiture bill was passed and signed in the celebration. And you could hear the drums throughout the Capitol building.
Yes.
And the floors were shaking.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, this building will never, ever be the same.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Eliza, thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.